8 times, Harvey walked through the marble lobby of Ether Capital with a faded yellow file folder in his hand and his dignity on his shoulder. 8 times the receptionist picked up the phone and dialed upstairs. 8 times the answer came back down from the elevator banks. No, I'm not interested. He never argued. He collected his folder, tucked it under his denim-clad arm, and walked back out to his old truck. He drove home, cooked dinner for his 7-year-old daughter, Sharon, and slept perfectly well. Then came a rainy Tuesday at 2 a.m., and this time it was not Harvey walking through anyone's door. This time, billionaire CEO Cassandra was staring at her phone in a pitch-black office, her hands shaking as she prepared to dial a number from a wrinkled, rejected file, holding a $40 million acquisition on the verge of total collapse. How does a single dad rejected 8 times end up holding the key to her survival? Keep listening, share, like and find out. The marble floor of Ether Capital's lobby was polished to such a high mirror shine that it felt like walking on water, or perhaps thin ice. Over the course of 12 months, Harvey learned the precise geography of that room. He knew that the morning sun hit the brushed titanium reception desk at exactly 9:15, casting a sharp, blinding glint off the glass elevator banks. He knew that the air always smelled faintly of expensive white tea and cold filtration. And he knew, with absolute mathematical certainty, that his presence there was an anomaly. Every 6 weeks, like clockwork, he would step through the revolving glass doors. He wore the same faded denim shirt, washed so many times the collar had gone soft, and carried a standard, slightly rumpled yellow folder. To the high-priced analysts rushing past in bespoke charcoal suits, he looked like a courier who had lost his way or a contractor looking for the maintenance ledger. But inside that cheap cardboard folder lay a flawless asset restructuring proposal, a masterpiece of predictive liquidity models that accounted for market volatility years into the future. The ritual never varied. The receptionist, recognizing him by the 3rd month, would offer a tight, polite smile and dial upstairs. On 4 of those occasions, the rejection was delivered via a brief, cold intercom page from an executive assistant. But on the other 4, the dismissal was agonizingly personal. Cassandra would exit the executive lift, her sharp blonde bob catching the light, always mid-stride and locked onto her phone. Her tailored gray suits seemed engineered for war, not commerce. She wouldn't even slow down. She would simply glance at Harvey's denim sleeve, look at the worn edge of his folder, and raise a single, manicured hand in a dismissive wave. "No, I'm not interested," she would say to the room at large, her voice cutting through the lobby's quiet hum before she swept out the front doors to her waiting vehicle. She saw a single dad trying to pitch a small-time gamble. She didn't see the deliberate precision in his eyes, nor did she care that his data predicted the exact cracks forming in her company's foundation. 8 times, Harvey watched her walk away. He never pushed, never argued, and never raised his voice. He simply adjusted his grip on the folder, turned back toward his old truck, and went home to make Sharon's lunch for the next day, entirely aware that the clock was ticking down to a crisis only he could solve. To the corporate elite at Ether Capital, the man in the faded denim shirt was an invisible nobody. They had no idea that 5 years ago, the name Harvey Vance, the ghost of Wall Street, was spoken in hushed, reverent tones across the highest echelons of private equity. He had been a legendary restructuring prodigy, a man who could walk into a bleeding, multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, locate its fatal structural flaws within hours, and orchestrate a flawless turnaround before the closing bell. He had commanded a multi-million-dollar salary, an army of analysts, and a corner office that looked down on the clouds. Then, the world shattered. It didn't happen in a market crash, but in a quiet hospital room. His wife's sudden, tragic passing from an aggressive illness left Harvey holding a motherless, 2-year-old Sharon. In the brutal, 70-hour workweeks of Manhattan, Harvey looked at his crying daughter and realized corporate victory meant absolutely nothing if he wasn't there to build her childhood. He walked away from it all without a backward glance. He traded the tailored Tom Ford suits for denim, the high-rise penthouse for a modest suburban home with a tire swing, and the cutthroat boardrooms for a boutique asset consultancy run out of a spare bedroom. He became the dad who never missed a school play, who perfected the art of braiding hair, and who packed star-shaped sandwiches every morning. The street thought the ghost had died. In reality, Harvey had simply reallocated his genius. His quiet pride and deep emotional walls kept his past buried, but the brilliant financial mind never stopped working. He was no longer playing for Wall Street's greed. He was playing a much longer, more disciplined game to secure Sharon's future. Harvey didn't build his boutique consultancy to hide from the financial world. He built it to operate from the blind spots. Behind his quiet domestic life lay the cold, calculating mind of a grand master playing a multi-move game of chess. He knew precisely what Cassandra was planning long before the industry trades caught wind of it. He had spent late nights at his kitchen table, with Sharon asleep in the next room, dissecting Ether Capital's aggressive public filings. It took him less than 3 hours to locate the fatal structural flaw in her upcoming $40 million acquisition, a hidden liquidity trap that would trigger a devastating capital freeze the moment market volatility ticked upward. His 8 trips to the marble lobby of Ether Capital were never acts of desperation. Harvey didn't need Cassandra's money, he needed her paper trail. Every investment proposal he submitted was a meticulously documented piece of a larger puzzle. He drafted them with absolute precision, ensuring that each refusal by Cassandra was formally logged into Ether's corporate compliance system. He wanted to be a fully credentialed, fully vetted entity within their secure network. He knew Cassandra's arrogant nature would blind her to the warning signs, and he knew her predatory board would exploit the vulnerability the second it appeared. By the 8th rejection, the trap was set. Harvey had established a flawless, undeniable record of trying to warn the firm. He had left a trail of breadcrumbs that pointed directly to the solution, waiting in their system like a dormant lifeline. He didn't argue when she waved him away because he knew the math was absolute. He wasn't the victim of her arrogance. He was the architect of her only escape route. Now, he simply had to wait for the clock to run out, knowing that when her empire began to bleed, she would have no choice but to follow the data straight to his door. The trap sprung exactly when Cassandra was most vulnerable. High above the city in her glass-walled office, the numbers on her monitors suddenly halted, turning a sickening, violent red. Senior board member Julian Vance had moved in the dark, orchestrating a sudden, internal capital freeze that locked Ether Capital's liquidity doors tight right at the peak of the $40 million acquisition push. It was a bloodless corporate coup. With their assets frozen, the entire acquisition was on the verge of splintering, an impending disaster that would legally justify the board ousting Cassandra from her own CEO position by morning. Panic, cold and unfamiliar, tightened in her chest. She searched her secure network for any loophole, any missed asset pool, any alternative strategy that could bypass Julian's digital blockade. That was when her eyes caught a flashing notification in the compliance log, a series of 8 systematically rejected files from a boutique entity listed as Vance Asset Consultancy. With trembling fingers, she bypassed her assistant's screening notes and opened the primary folder. As the data flooded her screen, Cassandra felt the air leave her lungs. The proposals weren't the amateur gambles she had assumed. They were a masterclass in forensic restructuring. The man she had dismissed with a wave of her hand had predicted this exact internal liquidity crisis months ago, charting out a brilliant, watertight blueprint to counteract a hostile board takeover. She stared at the digital timestamp, a wave of profound humiliation washing over her. She had judged him by his faded denim shirt, his rumpled cardboard folders, and his unassuming, blue-collar exterior, blinding herself to the fact that a financial titan had been standing in her lobby all along. Now, with the clock striking 2 a.m., he was her only hope. The hum of Harvey's refrigerator was the loudest sound in the small, modest kitchen, puncturing the heavy silence that sat between them. Cassandra, still wrapped in her tailored charcoal coat that looked entirely out of place against the warm oak cabinets, sat stiffly on a wooden chair. Harvey stood by the counter, pouring black coffee into a chipped ceramic mug. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a tired father, still wearing a soft cotton shirt, his movements slow and deliberate. When he placed a second mug in front of Cassandra, he didn't offer a greeting. He simply leaned against the counter, crossed his arms, and let the quiet stretch until she couldn't take it anymore. With her pride entirely stripped away, Cassandra laid out the disaster: the frozen capital, Julian Vance's boardroom coup, and the impending 14-day collapse of the $40 million acquisition. She admitted, her voice tight and barely above a whisper, that his eighth proposal contained the exact structural bypass she needed. It was only when she desperately asked how a small-time consultant could map out such a complex corporate defense that Harvey calmly revealed his past. Hearing the name Harvey Vance, the legendary Wall Street prodigy who had vanished 5 years ago, made the room spin. Cassandra realized with a jolt of pure shock that she hadn't been ignoring an amateur, she had been dismissing the most ruthless restructuring mind the market had seen in a decade. But Harvey didn't give her time to process the revelation. He slid a single sheet of lined paper across the table, right next to Sharon's box of crayons. His terms were absolute, handwritten, and entirely non-negotiable. He would deploy his blueprint and save Ether Capital, but he would do it with total operational control over the 14-day restructuring window, independent of her board, and for a guaranteed long-term equal partnership. Cassandra stared at the paper, the stark contrast between his elite past and his fiercely protected present clear in every line. With the clock ticking toward morning and Julian's trap tightening, she pulled a pen from her designer bag and signed her name, fully aware that the power dynamic had permanently shifted. When Harvey walked through the glass doors of Ether Capital on Monday morning, the atmosphere shifted without him uttering a word. He still wore his dark denim, but the posture that had once seemed unassuming now carried the heavy, undeniable gravity of a commander entering a war room. The security guards, briefed by a frantic directive from the top floor, bypassed the check-in desk entirely and escorted him directly to the glass-walled war room on the 3rd or 4th floor. He carrying no expensive leather briefcase, only his mind and the laptop he usually used to help Sharon with her math homework. By day 3, the elite analysts who had once looked past him in the lobby were gathered around his desk in stunned, exhausted silence. Harvey operated with a quiet, lethal efficiency that left no room for corporate theater. While Julian Vance's faction tried to maintain their digital stranglehold on the firm's main accounts, Harvey quietly bypassed their blockades by routing capital through obscure, secondary asset pools he had mapped out months prior. On day 4, his forensic deep dive uncovered a series of glaring, catastrophic auditing errors embedded deep within Cassandra's original acquisition strategy, fault lines that Julian had intentionally left unchecked to guarantee her failure. Harvey didn't gloat or cause a scene. He simply marked the errors in red, recalculated the liquidity ratios, and quietly restructured the entire capital flow before the morning markets opened. From her corner office, Cassandra watched him through the glass partition, deeply struck by his unshakable competence. For a year, she had associated authority with expensive tailoring, loud boardroom declarations, and aggressive posturing. Yet here was a man quietly dismantling a multimillion-dollar corporate conspiracy while sipping coffee from a paper cup, completely unbothered by the pressure that had kept her awake for days. He was patient, methodical, and entirely grounded. When an analyst panicked over a sudden 3-point dip in the pre-market trading, Harvey merely looked up, gave a single, calm instruction that stabilized the asset line, and went right back to work. Cassandra realized then that Harvey wasn't just saving her company, he was entirely rewriting her definition of power, turning the tide of a corporate war from a laptop while the rest of the world slept. Julian Vance realized by day 8 that he was no longer fighting a standard corporate defense, he was being systematically dismantled. In a desperate bid to force Harvey out of the war room, Julian pulled his last remaining lever, using his executive authority to freeze the modest financial accounts of Harvey's boutique consultancy. It was a classic bully tactic designed to choke a small business and force a retreat. Julian expected panic, or at the very least, a frantic confrontation in the hallway. Instead, Harvey didn't even blink. Sitting at the glass desk, he calmly pulled up an encrypted communications channel, bypassing Ether's internal servers entirely. Julian didn't realize that freezing Harvey's accounts meant alerting the sleeping giants of Wall Street. With 3 brief phone calls to old private equity connections, billionaire fund managers who still owed their fortunes to the ghost's legendary turnarounds, Harvey had a $10 million liquidity bridge secured and deposited into his consultancy within 20 minutes. Julian's blockade was reduced to a minor footnote. More importantly, Julian's aggressive move played directly into the trap Harvey had set months ago. By executing the unauthorized asset freeze mid-contract, Julian had overstepped his legal boundaries, leaving a distinct, digital fingerprint inside the secure compliance network Harvey had forced Ether to open for him. Every keystroke, every bypassed protocol, and every illegal directive Julian issued was securely captured and encrypted on Harvey's external drive. Harvey watched the data compile with a cold, patient detachment. He didn't confront Julian, nor did he warn Cassandra just yet. He merely backed up the forensic audio and data evidence, tucked the drive into his pocket, and went back to work, leaving Julian completely unaware that his desperate attempt at sabotage had just handed Harvey the absolute proof needed to destroy him. The storm hit the global markets at precisely 11:40 on night 13. A sudden, unpredicted regulatory announcement overseas triggered a cascading sell-off, sending the pre-market indicators into a terrifying, free-flowing spiral. In her high-rise office, Cassandra watched her monitors bleed a deep, ruinous red. The sudden market dip had instantly vaporized the value of her collateral, threatening to kill the final $40 million acquisition deadline just hours before the opening bell. 30 miles away, far from the flashing panic of the trading floors, Harvey sat at his small kitchen table. The only light in the room came from the harsh, blue glow of his laptop screen and the soft, amber nightlight plugging into the wall near the hallway where Sharon slept soundly. He didn't have an army of analysts or a wall of tracking monitors, but he had a decade of survival instincts. As his phone vibrated violently with a panic call from Cassandra, Harvey didn't answer. He simply flipped open his spreadsheets, his fingers moving across the keyboard with a brutal, rhythmic speed. For 3 grueling hours, Harvey managed the high-pressure crisis from his kitchen, his face a mask of absolute, icy calm. While Julian Vance's faction scrambled in confusion, Harvey executed a flawless, rapid-fire capital reallocation. He systematically pulled liquidity from the secondary asset pools he had secured on day 8, shorted a declining tech index to hedge their losses, and rerouted the entire funding structure through an immune sovereign bond line. By 3 a.m., the bleeding stopped. When the opening bell finally rang, the acquisition framework was completely stabilized, insulated from the crash by a masterclass in crisis engineering. Harvey quietly closed his laptop, rubbed his tired eyes, and walked down the hall to check on his daughter, leaving the financial world entirely unaware that a single dad at a kitchen table had just rewritten market history. The boardroom of Ether Capital was suffocatingly quiet on the morning of day 14. Julian Vance sat at the head of the mahogany table, a smirk playing on his lips as he prepared to call the vote that would strip Cassandra of her title. The board members spoke in low, solemn whispers, believing the failed acquisition was the final nail in her coffin. But when the heavy double doors swung open, it wasn't a defeated CEO who walked in. Cassandra stepped into the room with absolute posture, carrying a single, uncorrupted drive. Behind her, standing with quiet authority in his simple denim shirt, was Harvey. Before Julian could even read the opening motion, Cassandra plugged the drive into the central console. The massive wall monitors instantly flared to life, displaying a devastating, line-by-line autopsy of Julian's operations. Harvey's impeccable financial data laid bare the exact architecture of the internal capital freeze, proving with mathematical certainty that the acquisition hadn't failed. It had been saved, closing at a flawless completion rate despite the midnight market crash. Then came the true reckoning. Cassandra activated the forensic audit files, playing the encrypted data and digital signatures Harvey had captured during Julian's illegal asset freeze. Julian's face drained of color as his corporate sabotage was exposed to the entire room in indisputable, high-definition clarity. By the time the presentation ended, the board didn't vote on Cassandra's removal. Instead, security was called, and Julian Vance was summarily terminated and escorted from the building. With the room cleared of treason, Cassandra turned to Harvey. In front of the remaining board members, she did something she had never done in her entire career. She publicly humbled herself. She pulled a document from her leather folder, but it wasn't a standard, boilerplate corporate agreement. It was a formal, long-term equal partnership contract, translating every single handwritten term Harvey had drafted at his kitchen table into absolute corporate law. As Harvey signed his name with his characteristic, calm precision, the rebirth of Ether Capital was sealed. He wasn't the ignored single dad in the lobby anymore. He was officially appointed to the strategic board as its premier, most trusted advisor. Both of them were fundamentally changed. Cassandra had finally learned to look past superficial status to value true strength of character, while Harvey had successfully bridged his past elite genius with his present domestic devotion, securing a limitless future for Sharon without ever having to hide behind his stoic walls again. What a satisfying conclusion to a high-stakes corporate battle. Harvey's genius and Cassandra's transformation made for an incredible ride. If you loved watching a brilliant single dad completely flip the script on a billionaire CEO who underestimated him, make sure to hit that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling story of sweet revenge, hidden identities, and high-stakes drama. Let me know in the comments what your favorite part of Harvey's brilliant play was, and we'll see you in the next story.